Good morning, LinkedIn. I'm Nina Melendez. Welcome to LinkedIn News Live, where the business conversation begins with you. The issue of mask and vaccine mandates is hitting a personal note for parents and teachers as kids head back to classrooms for the new school year. Communities and districts agree that it's not about pandemic politics, it's about what's best for the children and school workers. But what's perceived as best is in contention. My next guest has taken a stand and represents 1.7 million teachers, paraprofessionals, and other faculty and staff. She is Randy Weingarten, AFT president. AFT is the American Federation of Teachers Union. She's been at that post since 2008. Prior to that, Weingarten served for 12 years as president of the United Federation of Teachers. She holds degrees from Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations and the Cardozo School of Law. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nina. It's an honor.
So great. It's great to have you. You know, first of all, what a tough position to be in, and such a polarizing topic. For our viewers, just tell us where you stand on the issue of vaccine mandates for teachers before going to school.
So, I guess it was not last Sunday, but a couple of Sundays ago, I had said the week before that I was going to bring our leadership together on vaccine issues and mask issues, because things had really changed since the beginning of July, and that you're seeing with the Delta variant spread, combined with the fact that kids under 12 can't get the vaccine, and that it's really, really important to have kids in school, but to do it safely, that I thought that we needed to have another conversation and revisit our policy of basically, we believe in vaccines, but we thought that the most efficacious way to get the country vaccinated was a whole of society approach, and to do it in a voluntary way. And so this past week, first I said it on Sunday that I thought we should be working with, not opposing our employers on their vaccine requirements. And that's where my leadership came to. So I'm very proud of the leadership of the AFT. The same thing happened in terms of the NEA, that, what we're saying is that vaccines are really, 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 really important. They have been important for years. 50 states require immunizations of kids before they can go to school. And so we're saying that in this moment, even though 90% of teachers have already been vaccinated, teachers have actually stood up, did what they needed to do, like they have done in terms of schooling, that we will be working with our employers on whatever vaccine requirements and policies they see fit. And that's what you're seeing this week.
So you had initially said that you were afraid that a vaccine mandate could backfire.
Correct.
And now with the small shift in your perspective, what accounted for that?
Because of the nature of the Delta variant and the spread, and that we have a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And yes, I believe that a lot of the blame on this is the disinformation and the misinformation about vaccines. As I said, I think this is a whole of society approach here. But having said that, I do think we need to get as many people vaccinated as possible. There are real exemptions for, people who medically can't take a vaccine. And I've heard from several members about that. And, there are religious exemptions. But I think what shifted it for me, because we've always been pro-vaccine as a union, what shifted it for me and what shifted it for our leaders, because my position is not different than my leadership now, is that you see this weekend, 1,900 kids, the largest number ever, or for this COVID, trauma, 1,900 kids have been hospitalized. There is over 94,000 cases of kids with COVID as of August 5th. So the shift was because of the virulence of the Delta variant. And I think if we believe that schools need to be open for kids. This is the third year of COVID, but they also need to stay open. And so these two things that are controversial, vaccines and masks, they have to be in place for us to be able to open schools and keep them open for kids. The masks are, I know they're uncomfortable for
I want to
teachers.
get, just a minute, Randy, I want to get to the masks. But I want to ask, staying with the vaccines, what are the options for teachers who do not want to get the vaccines?
Well, right now, most of the, as we're walking into this school year, there's, a lot of states that, are not requiring vaccines for anyone. And, states like Texas and states like Florida. But for the states that are looking at how we deal with all of this, there's two basic vaccine kind of requirements or vaccine policies that we're now seeing. One is vaccine or test, meaning that you take a vaccine or you subject yourself to regular testing. And that's what California is doing. That's what Bill de Blasio in New York City is doing. And that's what I foresee a lot of other people doing. That's what Washington, D.C. is doing. The second alternative has been, and you see this now in LA and in Chicago, that by the middle of October, that everyone will have to be subject to, everyone will get vaxxed unless you have a religious exemption or a medical exemption. And look, the medical exemptions are real. And and there are people that can't get it. And if we can get to herd immunity, that's going to be terrific. So I also want to say that this should be a whole of society approach. Teachers, you tell me another group of people other than doctors who have as high a rate on a voluntary basis as teachers. Teachers have, they understood how important vaccinations were. In New York City, for example, the union stood up a vaccination plan, back in January that 35,000 of our members took, immediately. And so, teachers see how important it is. And I wish if we had every other profession or every other kind of set of our population at 90%, we'd have a much less problem today than we have.
So you're really speaking to the 10% of teachers who have refused so far to not get vaccinated. So it's, right. and that's 10% of 1.7 million of the teachers that are part of your union.
It's not, but who I'm speaking to is not just those 10%, mm-hmm. And I've heard from some of them, and there's legitimate medical issues for some people, and that should be protected. They should, that's part of why herd immunity is so important. There are people who are immunocompromised and can't get it and are fantastic teachers, and they still want to teach, and they should be teaching. There are people for whom there are religious reasons, and there are, but what really is going on, Nina, is the misinformation. There's a lot of people have talked to me. They're skeptical because they think that they'll never be able to get pregnant or that their kids will not be able to have kids. And we have to debunk those myths. There are people who think that this vaccine, as opposed to any others, there should be a free, that COVID doesn't really exist, and why should they have to take it? And
Randy, do you think this is going to change once the FDA gives approval for the vaccines that we have?
Well, I think that some of it will change when the FDA gives approval. I think that part of the issue is that, remember, Trump called it Operation Warp Speed, which immediately people said, oh, maybe they're taking shortcuts. So I think some of it will change. What will really make this change is when doctors, that's why the pediatricians, what they've said is so important. People trust their individual doctors, and they also trust their individual peers. And I think that they're also going to trust when other employers, not just education employers, but like Disney and United and Tyson and so many employers now, the banks, are basically saying, unless you get vaccinated, you're not going to have a job.
Yeah.
And so I think the reason I keep on saying it's a whole of society approach is because we all need to be all in on this, which is part of the problem. This is the first crisis in my history, in my recollection, the first major crisis that has affected America that has gotten so polarized on ideological lines rather than all of us being all in to fight this crisis. So I blame the misinformation more than anything else. People are scared. And so part of this, that's part of the reason why initially we said, you know, it was more efficacious to do the voluntary route. And look what happened. We had 90% of our, membership take the vaccine. But I think this kind of the sense of schooling is so important. Kids under 10 or 12 can't get the vaccine yet, that we're trying to actually just have society has to be all in fighting COVID and stemming the tide of Delta.
Speaking of larger society, I want to pause the conversation and say hello to some of the members who are joining us from actually all over the world. It looks like Charles from Hong Kong, Laura from Indianapolis, Leonard from Albania, and Shannon from New Orleans. And if you have any questions or comments about this topic of vaccine mandates for teachers, I'm speaking with Randy Weingarten. She is the president of the second largest teachers union in the United States, AFT. Randy, so you mentioned the masks, and I want to get to that now. That has been hugely controversial, the mask mandate for children. I'd love to know where you stand on the issue.
Look, I am, as I have my mask right with me, I do wear a surgical mask over the summer as opposed to my cloth mask. And yes, I know that KN95s are better than the surgical masks. Look, this is the bottom line. I know masks are uncomfortable. I'm an asthmatic. They're uncomfortable for me. I have labored breathing every time I wear them. But if the science is basically saying that this is the best way with vaccines to stop transmission of this Delta variant, and we want kids to be in school, it feels like A and B equals C. If this is the best way and we want kids to be in school, then we have to mask up for the time being. I understand when parents are saying, teachers are saying it too, that it hurts the learning experience, just like, other things hurt the learning experience. But it's better to have schools reopened and have our kids in school and wear a mask than not have our kids in school or have the quarantines that will happen. So let me be really clear. We have to be in school, doing in-school learning this year. This is the third year of COVID. Our kids need it. Our educators want it, but we need to be safe. And so that's why on vaccines, we have said and pushed towards having and working with our employers on their vaccine policies, including mandates. But we also need everybody for the time being to mask up and not have teachers be the mask police, and understanding full well that it is not a perfect solution, but it is the best solution we know of right now in order to get all our kids back. We also need good ventilation, and we also should have the distancing. I want to see those numbers of Delta go down just like everybody else does.
Yeah.
But this is masks and vaccines are the best way, with ventilation and some social distancing, are the best way of having a real school year without interruptions for our kids.
So Randy, I am hearing that you are like highly encouraging teachers and students to protect themselves, wear masks, and get vaccinated. But I didn't quite hear that you support the mandate for children to wear masks.
I support the mandate for children.
You support the mandate for sure. And what about for children who, with special needs, where wearing a mask is not, maybe not even be possible? Maybe they have, to touch and sensory issues.
I think there will be exceptions. There has to be exceptions, just like there has to be exceptions in terms of vaccines for the medically fragile.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of masks that were clear. I'm I'm not saying that, that there, unfortunately, in terms of COVID, there is not a single solution. We do not have a magic wand. We can't wake up the next day and say everything's going to be gone. And probably we'll never have a situation where COVID is completely gone anymore. But seems to be the best solution possible for not having the kind of disruptions that we've had in the past. Look what just happened in Palm Beach County this last week. There are 800 or 900 kids, or there were, that were in quarantine after the third day of school because of the number of positive cases. So, and we're seeing that in Texas, and
actually one of my coworkers, her son goes to school in Florida, and she just told us before the show that there was a 5-year-old that got COVID because of going to school and not being protected. So
there's 1,900 kids. Mm-hmm. There are 1,900 kids in hospitals right now as we speak, according to Reuters, that because of COVID related things. I hope that kids do not, even with the Delta variant, do not get COVID. I hope it's true that they're still much better protected because of their immunization systems. But if you see that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, and we can't get kids who are under 12 vaccines yet, then it's not perfect, but what is the most efficacious way of keeping kids in school and protecting each other?
Speaking of those kids who under 12 who cannot get vaccinated, right? Speaking of the other group of children, over 12 who are eligible for the vaccine, what is the AFT stance on, or what do you think about mandating that children above the age of 12 get vaccinated, especially if they don't want to wear the masks?
I think ultimately, just like other vaccines, and hear my words, ultimately, this vaccine will be like other vaccines, like what happened with polio, like what happened with smallpox, like what happened with, measles and others. But right now we have to get through the disinformation, and we have to look. There's the rate of kids that have been vaxxed between 12 and 18 are pretty low, which means we have to work with parents about this. And the AFT, we put $5 million out into the field. We have 70 grants that we've given, affecting about 1,800 of our 3,500 locals. And if you aggregate the number of kids where these grants are taking place, it's about 20 million of the school children in the United States. Every Saturday afternoon, you see a vaccine clinic in many of these locals across the country. This Saturday, for example, at the big parade in Chicago, we had a vaccine clinic. Our local had a vaccine clinic there this Saturday. In Anderson, Indiana, where I was on Friday night, we had a vaccine clinic stood up. In Scranton, where I was Wednesday night, we did a fair with vaccine clinics. In St. Louis the week before, we had vaccine clinics. In Cleveland, next Saturday, we're going to have vaccine clinics. So you get my drift. Doing everything. We put money out. We're working with vaccine clinics. I did my column in the New York Times this week about vaccines. But we have to convince parents that vaccines are really important for their kids right now. We have to convince them, and we have to debunk some of these myths.
Randy, I'd love to speak to you after the AFD approves these vaccines and see where things are and how things have changed. We have to let you go, but I so appreciate you being on the show, and I especially appreciate all of the work that you're doing representing teachers and working hard for them. So thank you.
Thank you. And our kids and our communities.
All of it. Really appreciate it. That was Randy Whitegarten. She is the president of AFT. And speaking of teachers, I want to bring up my next guest. She is a Boston public school teacher, Kimberly Hogan. She teaches inclusion kindergarten, which means special needs and non-special needs children. And she's been there for the past 9 years. So Kim, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Nina.
So Kim, I just want to get a reading a little bit on just how the last year has been. How are you doing? How was the school year? How is everything?
Things are good. It was a very stressful year. I think as a whole, kind of all of the educators I know, it was a very stressful year. It was a year full of growth for a lot of us. Um, but I think that we learned a lot. I think that we have strengthened our communities in a lot of different ways. I think our relationships with our families, we were able to develop relationships in a different way. And it brought us all together. So I think that includes the families, that includes the communities. We had something called Equity Roundtable at all of the Boston schools, which I think was really helpful, just bringing the community together and figuring out for each community what the families and community needed. And then from there, we were able to build and recreate and adapt. And I feel like it was just a year of adapting what you typically do, learning and growing, and just keep moving forward.
And speaking of community needs, what are you hearing about the vaccine mandate, about mask mandates? What are you hearing from teachers? I mean, and parents. I mean, your kids are probably too young to have a strong opinion on it, but what are you hearing from your community on this?
I think the bottom line, educators, families, communities, they want students back in the classroom. I think academically, they want them back into the classroom, but also for their mental health, their social, emotional well-being. And that's for families, and that's also for the staff and for the students. I think the bottom line is it's better for them to be in person, and we just need to figure out a way to get them back in safely. And if that means supporting communities and making sure that there are opportunities for people that they trust to give them more information about the vaccine and more information about masks, then I think that's where we start, giving them the right information and making them feel comfortable. Because I think it really...
Sorry, I was going to say, do you support the vaccine mandate for teachers?
I think mandating that will create some issues, and you don't want people to be forced into doing something that they don't want to do. But I think creating more opportunities for them to learn from people that they trust and from people in their community, giving them information, I think is highly effective.
Well, so and I just want to clarify, Kim, and not saying that you're saying that, but the mandate is the communities wouldn't be or the schools wouldn't be forcing people to get the vaccine. It would just be, if you don't get the vaccine, you can't come into work. So it's not quite, you're going to get jabbed with the needle if you don't. And what about the mask mandate for kids? Do you support that?
I think it's difficult. I think it's more helpful if we're not wearing masks, but if that's what we need to do to get students and our scholars back into our classrooms and into the classrooms full time and not, I think that that's what we do.
Kim, do you feel safe going into the school year? Do you feel like the city and the state have been having teachers' safety in mind when setting up these policies?
I think that they are trying to keep us in mind. I think in certain cities, like in Boston, there's just a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different types of classrooms. There's different types of schools. There's lots of issues in various settings. I do think that within our community, I feel safe going back into the classroom, just knowing that I'm supported by the community around me, and that we're doing what we can to make sure that everybody is safe and trying to be thoughtful and mindful about how we are getting our scholars back into the building.
And I do have to let you go now, but I want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything you want us to understand about what it's like being a teacher right now, or what it's like being a teacher during these times?
I think I'm pretty proud of the educators that I work with and the educators that I know. I think it was a really stressful year. It was hard for all of us. But I do think that we've learned, we've grown, we've learned how to be more creative. I think we've learned a lot about technology, and I think moving forward, our teaching will just be stronger. So I think that the educators around me have done a fantastic job. I think we've kind of helped to build each other up and build communities so that we can support each other. And I think that's been really helpful.
Well, Kimberly, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for being a teacher. I have teachers in my family, and you guys are doing God's work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That was Kimberly Hogan, a kindergarten school teacher at Boston Public Schools. And thank you for everyone who commented or joined us today on the show. If you want to continue the conversation, you can. You can also check out some of our other stories in the news module to the right of your feed, or if you're on mobile, click into the search box. Now, tomorrow at 2 p.m., our editor-in-chief, Dan Roth, will be sitting down live to discuss makeup maven Bobbi Brown's new company, Jones Beauty. We'll hear about the lessons she learned from running 2 companies and a hotel during the pandemic. Wow. I'm Nina Melendez. Thank you for joining LinkedIn News Live.